Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing my week 3 picks for the 2022 Overwatch League season. And of course this is the first weekend where the APAC region will be playing matches. So all 7 APAC teams will be in action this weekend. So we'll get a nice look at that. So a lot of picks to be made this week. We have 18 games to talk about. So let's jump in and let's just go with it and take a look at all of the games going on this weekend. So I'm going to be doing it basically in order of when they will take place, regardless of region. So we're going to start with Friday, do all 6 games on Friday, then all 6 games on Saturday, all 6 games on Sunday. So it'll be 3 APAC, 3 Western, 3 APAC, 3 Western, 3 APAC, 3 Western. Just to let you guys know, that's the way I'm doing it. That's the order we're going in. So let's start with Friday. First game of the weekend. Early hours Friday morning of the Philadelphia Fusion and the Shanghai Dragons. First match for both of these teams so far this season. 2 teams I feel pretty good about, all things considered. These are 2 of my top 3 teams in the APAC region. If you saw my power rankings, Dragons number 1, Fusion number 3. It's tough to kind of guess what's going to happen this point in the season because we haven't seen either of these 2 teams play yet, but I'm very confident in the Dragons. I think they are the number 1 team in the league right now, just based on what we can gather from where all the other rosters are from 2021 to this season. I still think Shanghai should be favored. They were so much better than everybody else last season for a good chunk of the season, especially that second half of the season, that I feel like it's difficult to predict against them right now. So they are my pick for this weekend to take the win on Friday over the Philadelphia Fusion. I will give the Fusion a map win, but I'm going to say a 3-1 victory for the Dragons. We don't know what the meta is yet in the APAC region, so this is really all speculation, but I'm going based purely on how good I think the rosters are, and to me, Shanghai's better, so I think they're going to take this one. Second match of the weekend, Guangzhou Charge taking on the LA Valiant, my 2 bottom-ranked teams in my power rankings for the APAC region, so I think you kind of can figure out how well I think this match is going to be, or how good it's... Anyway, I think it's going to be a close match. I think we're going to kind of see where these 2 teams are at in terms of their abilities. I feel really good, though, about my prediction for this one. I think it's going to be a close series, like I said, but I do think the Guangzhou Charge will ultimately take this away. I think their identity is much clearer than that of the Valiant, though I do have a lot of faith in the Valiant's coaching with No Hill as their head coach. I think the Charge have a clearer direction, and I do think their talent is ultimately better than that of the Valiant. The Valiant have some high highs potentially with players like Dia and Innovation on that roster, but I ultimately think that it will go the way of the Guangzhou Charge in a 3-2 score. I feel good about Choi Sewan. I feel good about that support line with Molly and with Farway. And so I do think it'll be close, but ultimately I think the Guangzhou Charge will take it in a score of 3-2. Final APAC game on Friday is the Hangzhou Spark against the Seoul Dynasty. I think this one will be pretty close as well. I don't know what to expect with either of these 2 teams yet. Hangzhou, for me right now, is a very interesting team to take a look at because if they're at their best, I think they will be competing with some of those top-level teams in the APAC region, but it's hard to predict that they will be at that point. The Seoul Dynasty, I think, could have a slow start to their season. I think ultimately they are the better team in this region between these 2. I had them at number 2 in my power rankings, but I think there are some potential issues that the Dynasty could face early on. I think the Spark last season kind of showed that they have some really strong star power with Shy, and I think that adding Alpha Yi really does elevate that team as well. I'll be interested to see what they do in the tank line. That's kind of my biggest question mark, but I do think the Seoul Dynasty should be favored. I think with Smurf, Creative, Profit, Fitz, like those are 4 players that I think are just exceptional and incredibly talented. I think that they will take the win, but it's early in the season, so I think it's going to be close. I'm going to go a 3-2 for the Seoul Dynasty with that one. Moving on to the Western region. First game on Friday is the Paris Eternal taking on the Washington Justice. A week ago, I may have predicted this game to be closer than what I will today, but based on what we have seen, I think there is not really any chance that the Paris Eternal keep this series close. They have struggled. They obviously made a big roster change, going from Naga to Wub. They only have those 2 DPS players. We saw the Washington Justice completely drub and dismantle the Atlanta Reign last week. The Justice seem to be doing well against teams with logos that are birds, and so I'm going to give the Justice a win in this one, 3-0. I think they look too good right now. I think with the Decay Happy duo, they are playing exceptional Overwatch right now, and I think their support line has been far better than it was last season. I think the Justice roster really does have a chance to surprise a lot of people as this tournament cycle goes on and as the season progresses. So, to me, this one's pretty obvious. Big win for the Justice here, 3-0. Second match on Friday, Florida Mayhem take on the New York Excelsior. I finally have time to watch an NYXL match live. I haven't gotten to see a single NYXL match live this season, so good for me. Unfortunately, I don't know how well this match will go for New York. These are two teams that I think are relatively close together in the rankings, in terms of like power rankings. To me, it really looks like Florida's kind of that middle of the pack gatekeeper team that will kind of decide whether or not a team is kind of in that upper echelon or not. And so for me, this is really going to be an interesting series to watch. I think Florida has the adaptability and the flexibility that New York does not have, though I think New York has some pieces that are incredibly talented. I've had a million rants about New York. I'm not going to get on and on and on about it. Right now, I think the Mayhem look a little bit better than New York has. To be fair, New York has played some very tough opponents. They've played the Shock, the Gladiators, the Reign, so it's hard to fully gauge where New York is at right now. We know they're not an elite level team, and their win was over a Vancouver Titans team that we don't feel good about at all. So it's very difficult to gauge exactly where this NYXL team is at. The Mayhem, we have a bit of a better idea. They've played some good opponents. They've played some weaker opponents. We kind of can see where they're at. So I think it'll be close, but I'm going to give the Mayhem the edge in this one. 3-2 victory for them. They just look better right now, and I think that they will take this series away, ultimately, from the NYXL. Final match on Friday is the Toronto Defiant taking on the Dallas Fuel. I think this will be a really good series. We only saw one game from the Defiant last week, and it was a pounding of the Paris Eternal, so we don't know a lot about the Defiant yet. Obviously, they lost to the Justice. They beat the Outlaws. So we know they're a solid team. 2 wins, 1 loss. They lost to a team that we look at as a very good team. They beat 2 teams we look at as not very good teams. This is another challenge for them. I think it'll be really interesting to see how they match up to the Dallas Fuel. I think it'll be close. We know the Dallas Fuel right now are a very good team with a win over the Gladiators and a win over the Justice. That were both, well, win over the Justice pretty dominant. Win over the Gladiators, not as much. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with this one. I'm going to go 3-2 in this one in favor of the Fuel. And the Fuel are the better team right now. The Defiant don't look bad. They still look pretty solid, all things considered. I've been pretty impressed with them so far this season. But the Fuel right now look to be potentially the best team in the Western region. It's either them or the Shock. We haven't really seen those two teams match up yet, so that's something we'll figure out over time. But right now, the Fuel, the way that Hanbin played against the Gladiators, I think really shows me that they are a very strong, very solid team. I think the meta favors them pretty well right now. Who knows what will happen later on down the road, but right now I will give the edge to the Fuel. 3-2 might even be generous. It might be a pretty big win for the Fuel, but I figured I'd give the Defiant 2 maps because I do think the Defiant have looked good so far this season, and they've had a pretty good amount of time to prepare for this one because they only played 1 match last weekend. Moving back over to the APAC region for Saturday. First match is the Chengdu Hunters taking on the Guangzhou Charge. First match of the season for the Chengdu Hunters. To me, that is a big reason why I feel very strongly about this score of 3-1 for the Hunters. This will be the first game they've played all season, which means that they will have had footage on the Charge from the day before, and there will be no footage of them from the day before for the Charge to go off of. I don't love the Hunters roster. I have been critical of this Hunters roster, what they have put together this season. I don't think it's an improvement from last season. I think in many ways it's a downgrade, if not just a horizontal move. But I think that the talent of the Hunters with Leave and with Monk, and Nisha in particular, is very, very strong. And I think right now the meta favors Genji, and so we know Jinmu can kind of dominate on that hero as well. So I feel very good about the Hunters to take this series in a 3-1 fashion over a Charge team that I still don't feel amazing about, though I don't think they look too bad. Next match on Saturday is the Shanghai Dragons against the Hangzhou Spark. Once again, the Spark team have had a weird amount of success against the Dragons in the past. Obviously, they beat them last season pretty dominantly, one of their first matchups during the season. Shai really kind of made a name for himself in that match, and that was kind of probably his best performance all season. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I don't really know what to expect from the Spark still, because like I said, with their match against the Dynasty, we don't know who they're going to play at tank. They have 4 DPS, so there's potential movement there. Their support line is pretty solid. We know what they're going to do there. But it's really that kind of tank and DPS area. We don't know exactly what the route's going to be for this team. Shanghai, we know who they are. We know what they're going to run. They're going to run Fate if they need a main tank. They're going to run Void if they need an off tank. And that is just an improvement on every role, really, over the Spark. So talent-wise, compositional-wise, meta-wise, I think the Dragons will take this one. And if it is a really strong Genji meta, we might actually see a lot of Who Are You, which would be interesting. Could be Lip Who Are You potentially getting a lot of playtime, which would be fun to see. So definitely keep your eyes out for at least one map of Who Are You in this weekend, because I think if we really are getting a lot of Genji in the APAC region, could be Genji Sombra or something like that, I don't know exactly. But if we do see Genji, Who Are You might pull out the Genji for the Shanghai Dragons. That'll be exciting. But 3-1 score for me, Shanghai Dragons over the Hangzhou Spark. Final APAC game on Saturday, I have the Seoul Dynasty, LA Valiant. This is the only one that I have this entire weekend in the APAC region that I think will be a one-sided affair. I know the Valiant are much improved from last season, and I definitely think they will be a formidable opponent as opposed to what they were last season, where they literally had players playing off roles. But I really like this Dynasty roster. I really like what they have done. I think that they look very strong. I think that they have the advantage at every role, at every spot over the Valiant. And I really don't think that it's going to be particularly close. I have a lot of questions about where the Valiant DPS are going to go. I have a lot of doubts about Sashin as the only tank. To me, the Dynasty are going to win this one. I think it's going to be pretty one-sided. So I'm going to go in favor of the Dynasty, 3-0 over the LA Valiant. Move on to the Western region. I have a game here, London Spitfire, Houston Outlaws, that I think will be pretty close. It's going to be closer than people might expect it to be. There's a lot of interesting things going on here where you have two teams that have very defined, very kind of clear styles that are very different. Obviously, London Spitfire are a rush team. They are going to put Hottie on the Reinhardt, and they're going to play around that. Houston Outlaws are going to put Dante on the Doomfist, maybe a little bit of Piggy in there. But predominantly, we have seen Dante Doomfist, and that has been what this team has wanted to do. And these are two teams with stylistic differences that are going to clash. I think, generally speaking, the Outlaws' style is a little more, is a little better against what the Spitfire tend to run. However, the Spitfire could change it up a bit this week if they feel like it is the best option they have. Maybe they put Poco in on the Zarya, because the Zarya compositions have been pretty successful against what the Outlaws have been running. That's what we saw the Shock do. That's what we saw, how the Shock beat some of those teams that ran those compositions. Zarya is pretty good. We saw New York find success with Zarya when they were playing the Shock as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here. So I think the series will be pretty close. I think the Spitfire do look decent, and I think that there's a possibility that we see a new look from them that we haven't seen. I think it could be close. I still think the Houston Outlaws will win this series. I think they should be favored. I think they just look better right now as a whole than the Spitfire do. It's not the Spitfire look bad. I just think that the Outlaws have looked better so far this season. And so this one, for me, goes in the favor of the Houston Outlaws by a score of 3-2. Next, second match in the Western region on Saturday is my first big pick game of the week. San Francisco Shock versus the LA Gladiators. This, to me, is the biggest match of the week for a number of reasons. But ultimately, reason number one why this is the biggest match of the weekend is because this will be truly the biggest test for the Shock so far this season. They have rolled over their opponents. They have not played an opponent that I would say was too difficult. They played London and Paris and Houston and New York. Houston is a good team. I don't know how great they are. They're pretty one-dimensional, which is where I think the Shock benefited, was that they knew what to expect from Houston, and so they could just kind of counter it. The Gladiators have a lot of dimensions to their team. They're a very solid roster. They have a lot of really good players. I think in terms of pure talent, the Gladiators are arguably the most talented roster in this Western region. They've had some issues with kind of the way they play together. They've had some issues in terms of that side of things, but generally speaking, the Gladiators are among the best rosters in this Western region, and depending on who you ask, some might put them number 2, number 3 in this region. In some cases above the Shock, and in some cases below the Shock. And though the Shock right now are undefeated, they are the top team in the region right now by record, this is their first big test against a roster that I think really can push them to the limits. The Gladiators have had a test. They played the Fuel. They almost won, and they fell apart, and they got reverse swept. So this to me is the Gladiators. They're going to come back. They're going to be retooled. They're going to be refueled. They are going to look to bounce back from a relatively disappointing loss to the Dallas Fuel. This to me is a scary Gladiators team, the scariest they will ever be because of what they were last weekend, what happened to them last weekend. They are looking to bounce back, and they're looking to make a name for themselves to prove they are still among the best teams in this region. And so I think this game will tell you a lot. You're going to see a clash of titans, a clash of styles in a lot of ways. Right now, I want to give the Gladiators the benefit of the doubt that they are an elite level team. And I also want to give the Shock the benefit of the doubt that their wins against these opponents, just because they're weaker opponents, doesn't mean they're a bad team. Like, they dominated most of these games. Yeah, they've had a couple of questionable maps, right? Kings Row against New York. New York pretty heavily countered what the Shock were doing and found pretty strong success. And so really that kind of is the thing that I'm looking at, seeing what the Gladiators do in response. Maybe we see space on Zarya, and maybe that's the thing that really kind of gives the Gladiators the advantage in this series. But I'm going to ultimately give the Shock more benefit of the doubt that they right now are a better, more solid team than the Gladiators. And I'm going to give the Shock the win in this one. I'm going to predict a close 3-2 series that will ultimately go the way of the San Francisco Shock. I think it'll be back and forth, but I think the Shock take this one when all is said and done. Final match on Saturday, Boston Uprising versus the Toronto Defiant. One-sided affair, in my opinion. I don't think Boston looked good. They are switching too much. They're changing too many things. They're doing a lot of things that I just don't like the way this roster is handling their business. I think the Toronto Defiant are a very solid roster. I think they have some really good players on this team. I think they're a star roster in a lot of ways. So for me, this is a pretty one-sided affair. I'm going to go Toronto Defiant taking this series in a 3-0 fashion. I've liked what I've seen from them so far. I have not liked what I've seen from Boston so far. And so to me, Toronto is going to take this one 3-0. Moving on to Sunday, final day of matches. APAC region, first game is the Philadelphia Fusion taking on the Guangzhou Charge. I think this match has the potential to be pretty close. I think the Fusion are a team that are not going to be world beaters off the bat. I think it's going to take them a little bit of time before they really hit their stride. But this will be the third match for the Guangzhou Charge in 3 days. That is a lot of games to play. And I think the Fusion, who have an off day the day before, will get some valuable scouting time against the Charge when they play the Hunters the day before. Another team that are kind of similar in terms of where they are talent-wise with the Philadelphia Fusion. And so I think the Fusion will take the series. I think they're going to win this one. Like I said, it could be close. I think there is a lot of things the Fusion are going to have to kind of grow and learn from because they are a new and young team with a number of rookies on this team. You know, there are very few pieces on this team that have been together for a long period of time. You know, Carpe and Fury obviously played together back in 2020. But other than that, this team is pretty much entirely brand new. Obviously, you have some pieces who played together on T1, but definitely an interesting roster to be on the lookout for. But I think the Fusion take this one 3-1 when all is said and done. Next match, Chengdu Hunters versus Seoul Dynasty is my second big pick game for the week. This is a really tough match to predict because on the one hand, there is a Dynasty team that I am very confident in, that I feel very good about, maybe better than most people, but I do think they are a very, very good team. Against a Chengdu Hunters team that were obviously incredible last season and were, you know, the team that had an MVP player last season in Leave. And he's still there. And so I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in this matchup. And it's very hard to predict because I don't know what to expect out of Chengdu. Chengdu might be really, really good. They might be back to their last year's form. I think they have limitations on this roster. I don't think they're as well-rounded as they would have been had they held on to Aprita, had they run the 3 DPS line, which I think would have been more beneficial to this team than what they ended up doing with 2 tanks, 2 DPS, and 2 supports. But I still think there's a lot of talent on this roster. And this Dynasty roster is talented as well. A lot of questions about them with, you know, a new head coach and whatnot. So this is a fun match. I think this is a really interesting one. These two teams have had a lot of pretty mixed results, a very interesting history over the past few seasons. So I'm excited to see this clash take place. But I'm riding the Dynasty train. I think the Dynasty look better than the Hunters on paper right now. We haven't seen any gameplay, so that's all I have to go off of. So 3 matches in 3 days is a lot, and it could be difficult, and that's one of the things that really could be the difference for Chengdu, is that they don't have those 3 matches. Long series tend not to be the Seoul Dynasty's strength, and so that's one of my concerns, but I do think ultimately that they will take the series 3-2 over the Chengdu Hunters. Final game from the APAC region on Sunday is the LA Valiant versus the Hangzhou Spark, 2 teams that will have played 3 games in 3 days. This game could get really messy and really sloppy. I would not be surprised if this was a just ugly match between 2 teams that have a lot of question marks. Very sloppy play just because they're tired and they've played a lot of games over the course of 3 days. Very, very possible that that's what we get in this match. That's not to say these are bad teams. It's just to say that these are 2 teams that may be exhausted by the time this game comes around, and we could just get some pretty sloppy, kind of very just raw, just back and forth, brutal, just brawly Overwatch, which is pretty fun. So I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I do think the Spark are the better team on paper than the Valiant. I like what the Spark have. I think talent-wise, they look to be better than the Valiant do. And so I am going to go with the Spark in this one. I'm going to go with the 3-2, though. I think it could be pretty close. I think these are 2 teams relatively interesting in terms of what they have done so far. And so I think that the Spark are going to take it, but I think it'll be close. Moving on to the Western region. Oh boy, Sunday is not going to be a good day of matches in the Western region. I can feel it in my bones. First match is the Atlanta Reign taking on the Vancouver Titans. Only match for both of these teams this weekend, and it's not going to be very close. I don't think the Atlanta Reign have any possibility of losing to a Titans roster that has looked very bad so far this season. And though the Reign did get pretty demolished by the Justice last week, I don't think it's going to be much of a problem this weekend. I think the Reign just look better than the Titans do. 3-0 to me, Reign over the Titans. Not really much of a question. Second Western region match on Sunday is the Paris Eternal versus the Dallas Fuel. Once again, Paris don't look very good. Dallas look very good. I don't think it's going to be very close. I think there's another 3-0 Dallas over the Paris Eternal. I'm hoping we get a better look from the Paris Eternal this week than we did in weeks past. But they have a very tough weekend having to play Washington and Dallas. So I'm not too hopeful that we get a really good look out of the Eternal this weekend. So, yeah, sorry, Paris fans. And the final game of the weekend is the Boston Uprising taking on the Washington Justice, and once again, that is an example of a very good team in the Washington Justice against a team that has not looked very good in the Boston Uprising. So, sorry once again, this time to the Uprising fans. I think this is going to be a pretty one-sided affair in favor of the Washington Justice, who I'm giving the win 3-0. So that is it for my predictions for Week 3. Let me know your thoughts on them down below. If you think I'm right, if you think I'm wrong, if you think I'm completely out of my mind and I am off the goop and that I'm wrong about every single one of these picks, or if you think I may be onto something, maybe I have unlocked the secret to the universe and I'm going to go 18 for 18 this weekend, all of the scores correct. I don't know. We'll see what happens when time comes. Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments down below. If you agree, if you disagree, I'd love to hear from you, because that is what this is all about. That's going to be all for me for today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. But I'm going to get out of here. Thank you all once again. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.